Hello everyone. Masquerade Ball, title of the class. And I want to dedicate the class to the yahrzeit of Avram Ber ben Yosef Ephraim Halevi, father of our dear friend Greg. A very special soul. May his soul continue on his journey wherever it takes him, and may it elevate Greg and his family and all of us. The merit of our studying here in the schus and honor of his soul. So this week's chapter, there's one of the more bizarre episodes in the Bible, even though there are many, but this one particularly stands out, and it's always one of my favorite stories, let's put it this way. But it's filled with intrigue and mystery, and seemingly filled with, fraught with all kinds of, how shall we say it, seemingly inappropriate behavior. So the story is, after we read about Abraham and Isaac, we come to the story of Jacob and Asov, twins that are born in this week's chapter to Rebekah and Isaac. And the chapter begins, Ela told us, these are the children, the offspring of Isaac and Rebekah. And then it begins talking about difficult pregnancy. So the drama begins. Difficult pregnancy. Rebekah has a unusual, difficult pregnancy. And when she goes and inquires, by God, why is it so difficult? She's told that she's carrying two nations inside of her. These are the words of the Bible. Two nations that are in perpetual struggle with one another. That they're essentially antithetical identities, personalities. They will soon be known as Asov and Jacob, twins, but very different. And when one rises, the other one will fall. That's what Rebekah is told. And then they are actually born, and we see very distinct personalities. One develops into a hunter, into a man of the field, as the Torah puts it, and the other a scholar, Ishtam, a pure, innocent person involved with internal work as opposed to the hunter. And of course, these are very, as I said, opposite personalities. The story continues how they battle with each other. And then there are two main events that take place, that one more disturbing than the next, where Jacob, though he was a twin, but he came out second, buys the birthright from Asov at a moment of Asov's need. He's hungry. Jacob sells him a bowl of beans, basically, chont, as they say, and for that he purchases Asov's birthright. And then a little later in the story, where Isaac is ready to bless his oldest son, so Jacob masquerades, dresses up at the behest and at the encouragement of his mother Rebekah in the garments of Asov, and they ostensibly fool Isaac into thinking that Jacob is now Asov because he's wearing his garments. Isaac was already elderly and he couldn't see clearly, as the Torah says, and he blesses Jacob with Asov's blessings. And that, of course, creates the major rift between the two. Asov wants to kill his brother. Now, I've discussed this chapter many times in different contexts. The obvious question, of course, is how does a man, a scholar, a person who's considered to be a wholesome man of God, fool his brother not once but twice? And the whole episode of dressing up in the garments of his brother and fooling his father, it all seems quite odd, and actually feeds the stereotype of Jewish thieves. If somebody needs to look for a route and say, hey, where are these Jews? All the anti-Semites. This couldn't be more feeding anti-Semitism than anything you have here. Jacob, the father of all the Jewish people, is a deceiver, is a imposter, is someone who'll do anything to get what he wants. So it feeds all the themes of the protocols of elders of Zion or whatever other anti-Semitic literature, as episode directly documented in the Bible. So I've addressed this topic on many different levels, and I will obviously address it as well tonight. But I want to talk about it in a different context a bit, and that is, what is this dress? If Asov deserves the blessing, he deserves the blessing. What's the point of Jacob faking it? What's the point of putting on these masquerade, these masks? So this is the ostensible reason why I chose this topic, even though I know it's associated with another event this week which is not something we Jews necessarily celebrate, but I'll let you guess whether I am intending to discuss that or not. I don't know how much credence I want to give to that holiday. It has a lot of paganism involved in it, so I don't personally necessarily want to celebrate or advocate it. Not that I have anything against. People want to have fun that night, great. But it's interesting when you talk about masks, and obviously we have our own Purim Masquerade Ball. So you talk about masks, it immediately conjures up the biggest question of all, which is, on a personal level, the masks we wear. And we all wear masks. We wear different masks for different occasions. Different people, we put on different faces. We live in a world where we've learned to maneuver. And often what you see is not what you get. You may show me one face, and you may show someone else a completely different face. And there's the faces we show our parents, there's the faces we show our friends, there's the faces we show our enemies. Now, the question is, what does that tell us about ourselves? Who we are as opposed to what we're projecting. And is there anything healthy about it, unhealthy about it? Because in the worst extreme, obviously, when a person, for instance, feels the need to protect themselves because they may be hurt, and they project a certain personality to, let's say, satisfy parents or others who they feel pressured to want to conform to. So we can develop a whole different identity and personality based on externals or circumstances that completely wanders away from who we really are. Just to give a case, one example, there's hundreds and hundreds, thousands of examples. Very often, when it comes to relationships, you usually see this issue emerge. Because relationships touch home. They start affecting us in our emotional place. It's one thing, you're walking down the street, another, you're dealing with superficial matters where you're not exposed, so to speak, where you're not vulnerable. So then, you can maneuver, it doesn't touch you close to home. But as we all know, when something touches a raw nerve, a tender place inside of us, that's where we are far more careful, and that's where we jump. And that's where we are very protective. So if somebody's been hurt in a very deep emotional way, or they've never fully developed emotionally for the different fears or insecurities that we developed, what happens is we put on all kinds of masks to protect ourselves. And we do this from a very young age, to the point that at some point we actually have like an armor that you cannot pierce. And you see this very often, people in relationships or trying to communicate. So often it's almost a given that as soon as two people start getting closer to each other, that's when you start seeing walls go up, the defense mechanisms. Because as long as it's just fun, as long as it's not threatening in any emotional way, you don't have to really be present in the fullest way, you can manage that. But as soon as it really becomes demanding, where you now need to be there in a real emotional sense of the word, that's when all our defense mechanisms comes into play. Can we trust? Can we not trust? And if you really can't trust somebody, you'll have all kinds of armor. And the most sophisticated of us develop very sophisticated defense mechanisms, and this becomes our personality. To the point, and this is where it gets sad, and wasn't sad, tragic, that you can't distinguish between your mask and your face. Imagine, you put on a mask just to protect yourself, and then at the end of the day, you don't know yourself whether it's a mask, whether it's you or it's not you. And the reason for this, as I said, is mostly driven by fear and insecurity. Now, fear and insecurity sounds like a nice word, but it's actually very profound, because you see this all the time. I observe now my grandchildren. I have the luxury to do that, and I watch them, and I see how they react, because children are very pure. If you want to have a good version of yourself, the best version of yourself, you look at a child. Because a child is the way God gave the soul to this earth before human beings began to tamper and defile or deface. I always think of it like freshly fallen snow. We haven't yet had snow, but everybody knows that feeling of a freshly fallen snow. You wake up in the morning, nobody has yet walked outside, it's pristine, pure, no one has stepped on the soil. There's something very, very pure about it. Because it gives us a taste of innocence, of purity, of undefiled, untouched by human beings. There's something about that touches us all. You walk in the woods, you go to a place to see nature, untouched by humans, the waters, untouched by human beings. there's something very pure about it, because we're so exposed to things touched and man-made or man-shaped that it's very refreshing to see something the way it is in its original, so to speak. Of course, you live in a city like New York City or other major industrial cities, you barely have a taste of it. Everything is concrete. There's nothing real. The whole thing is a mask. You look outside here, yeah, it's beautiful, but buildings, human innovation and technology, but you think, what was once resting here before we covered it with concrete and with all our man-made stuff? It was just plain nature. Just plain nature. Who knows what was roaming here once in this part of the world? So at some point we think this is natural, to the point that, if I grew up here in New York, if I didn't know better, I think this is reality. And if I see a forest or a wilderness, I say, who made that? This seems far more real. So that's on a very basic level. But on a psychological level, what happens is children are themselves, and they will just react naturally to things. But if there's a repeated, I emphasize, this discouragement or dislike by their parents of something they're doing, slowly the child will begin to adjust what's expected. So if a child will naturally smile, children just smile, they laugh, they have their own natural exuberance, and parents, for whatever reason, are angry or something else like that, and they say, "Why are you smiling?" You tell that child enough times, the child will stop smiling. Which, of course, if you think about it, is chilling. Even though per se you could say, what's the big thing that happened? No, it's a major thing has happened. You've not let the child just be themselves. Which means, from here on, the child will always be second-guessing themselves and always wondering, am I satisfying someone else? Should I be smiling? And sometimes your own natural instincts you start challenging your own your natural instincts. This is what, if you want to know the dynamics, so to speak, dissecting the anatomy of abuse, this is the anatomy of abuse. Now, abuse has a very wide spectrum. You say abuse. Most of us think of abuse as something physical, some physical abuse, hitting someone, sexual abuse. There's emotional abuse, psychological abuse. But abuse is even the discouragement of a natural reaction. It's a form of abuse. Now, no human beings are perfect, and therefore children are resilient. So it's not like if a parent is angry in a bad mood, suddenly the child's life forever will be changed. That's not how it works, because the child has enough resilience to protect itself. But if it's repeated and it's consistent, and the parents' anger, or their parents' dysfunctionality, or the parents' insecurities consistently inform the environment in which the child growing up, then the child will begin to adjust. No different, for example, if you take a root of a tree and you place an impediment in front of it, the root will have to grow crooked. It will look for a way to grow around the impediment. This is how our psyches develop. So to use the analogy that I've often mentioned here, which is a Torah analogy essentially, that children are like warm balls of wax. So a warm ball of wax is very impressionable, and every impression you make in it gets etched into the wax. As it hardens, it becomes part of the wax. So if it's good experiences, that becomes part of our personalities. And if it's negative experiences, or, as I said, the lack of affirmation and vote of confidence and validation that a child gets, there's a lot of invalidation, a lot of critique, a lot of anger, the child will develop masks. And these masks will become very difficult to later shed, because they become almost second nature. The child recognizes, I have to put this mask on now because my father is angry, and if I don't smile, he's going to slap me, even though I want to cry. I can't tell you how many people have told me they can't stand the holiday season coming, Thanksgiving and the holidays after that, because they have to go back to their families and make believe everything is great. We'll smile for the picture. And it just brings up horrible memories of faking it all. A mask. Like one guy told me, a mask. I have to put on a mask for a month now, because if I don't, I feel I go back to my 2-year-old child terrified. And I say, and if you don't put on a mask, let's say you disrupt it, rock the boat. He says, I'm terrified of the prospect. So this is just examples. Now all of us have our masks. All of us have our disguises, our costumes, our faces, our smoke screens. I can go on a whole list if you like, but they may be too depressing. Our escape artistry. Some people are great escape artists. They always have excuses. and they know how to cover their tracks. Everybody's got their list, a whole litany, a whole routine, repertoire is maybe a good word. A tool chest full of tools to cover up who we are. Now, I use a strong example of a point where you can't distinguish between your masks and who you are. But even if it's not that extent, we still have those masks. And some of us think, I can tell you words that people have told me, I don't know what I would be like if I had no defenses up and I didn't have my armor. I think maybe I would just die. I'd be killed. I'd be too vulnerable. People would just take advantage of me. Some people have no clue what it is to be themselves because they were never themselves. They were never allowed to be. Again, I'm using strong examples not because I think everyone has that, but it's simply for discussion purposes. It's easier to talk about. In most cases, we have milder forms of what I'm describing, and frankly, most of us have no clue actually the distinction with who we are and what we project. That's the real truth, which is perhaps why trillions of dollars go into therapy, because we're trying to find out who we are, find out the identity. But the bottom line is, it's clear that we have all kinds of projected imagery. And sometimes it's very innocent and almost meaningless, but sometimes it's very profound. Now, being that I deal with people all the time, it's the first challenge I have. You meet somebody, you want to know what they're like, not what they say they're like, or what they're projecting. And trust is a big issue, because if there's no trust, obviously you're not going to fully allow yourself to experience yourself. The sad part, this is not about, nevertheless, it's not necessarily interpersonal, this is also intrapersonal, meaning within yourself. We don't necessarily even trust ourselves to let ourselves just be. It can be very terrifying. So, it's difficult in a room like this, and people sitting here, everyone has their own life story. People online, everyone's got their narrative. So it's difficult to be very specific, because everybody has a different story. But there are definitely certain generic and certain, I don't say generic, but certain general principles that we all can relate to. Like, for example, everybody has a mask, no question about it. If you're wearing it right now or not, you'll have to figure that out. I'm not here to expose that. So it's like the story with I once remember after a class I gave a number of years ago. Well, this happened more than once. I gave a class, and there was someone here in the class that used to come regularly. And he stopped coming. After a few weeks, I get an email from this person, and he writes to me that I don't know if you know how furious I am at me, because you literally embarrassed me in public when at one of the classes a few weeks ago, and I just can't bring myself to come back, and I felt I have to write to you because I realized that maybe you're not even aware, which I wasn't, obviously. And the guy writes to me, so I write back. He says, "Can you tell me what I said that was?" So he writes back, you want me to just pour more salt on my wounds by me telling you what you said? You can't remember. And the truth is, I had no clue, because I wasn't talking about him. I didn't even know about his life story, frankly. How would I know? So I wrote back to him that there's a story with the Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek, one of the Chabad Hasidic Rebbes, the third Rebbe, he was once speaking in public, and he spoke about a certain situation. And afterwards, one of his Chassidim who was there, one of his disciples, comes into him and says, "Rebbe, how could you speak about me in public like that?" So Rebbe said, "What do you mean? When I spoke about you? Did I mention your name? Did I discuss?" He says, "Yeah, you described my situation. Anyone that knows me knows you were talking about me." So Tzemach Tzedek responded with an analogy. He says, "I'm like a hat maker. I make hats, haberdasher they call it, right? I make hats of different sizes, and then I hang up the hats, and then people come in and they try on the hats, and they try them for size, and if it fits, that's the hat that fits them. And that's how I work. Now, you come in, the hat fits your size, meaning it fits your description, so then that is fits, and that's who I meant. When I made the hat, that's who I meant." So in other words, so I wrote back to this fellow, and he realized, I guess after a while, he realized that I had no intent. I didn't even. How would I know his life? No one told me. And I spoke about a situation, and I guess it fit. Or let's put it this way: he felt it fit. So I apologize if anything I say here sounds like I'm exposing anybody, but it's really, if it is, maybe God's putting the right words in my mouth. On the other hand, maybe I am. So that I'll leave you to guess, and you'll just determine if you feel I have to apologize. So I apologize beforehand if it's too raw or anything like that. But hopefully, my intention is obviously not to to just talk about sensitive issues, but to help myself and all of us get to grow. So just to mention the story, I should mention another story of his son, who was the Rebbe Marash. So someone came to him once. I have to give a few disclaimers before we get into the nitty-gritty. So someone came to see him and said, Rebbe, there's a fellow, I have a friend who did a really terrible thing. He's ashamed to come to you. So he sent me to find out what he can do to fix the situation. So the Rebbe says to him, let me ask you something. Why did he have to expose himself to you, which is also embarrassing? He could have come to me and say, I have a friend, which of course was the situation. So often when people say I have a friend that needs help, maybe it means ourselves. You didn't get that one? Okay, think about it. And in truth, the Talmud says something interesting. It says, one who prays for another in time of need will be responded to first. So very often when we do help a friend in need, the answer comes back to us. Because at the end of the day, as the Baal Shem Tov says, the world is like a mirror. If you see a flaw in another, it means you must have some connection to it, because why would you see it? And you'll find that people extremely get very, very, very disturbed by flaws that usually they have themselves. But in your own self, you only minimize it. Someone else, you say, I can't believe how a person could behave that way. I've seen this a number of times, and I say, you don't want to insult anyone. I say, do you think you have any of that? Because I sometimes realize the person who's so disturbed has it 10 times more than the one they're disturbed by. But they don't even notice. And why would it bother them so much? Okay, well, just a few little tips of how to look at people and actually what it teaches us about ourselves. So to go back to this whole mass discussion, so I thought appropriate because of the divine providence of that holiday I mentioned, or whatever you want to call it, is fine, so be it. As I said, it's a hat if it fits that. But above all, it's very appropriate because of the story in this week's chapter, as I said. The first masquerade, documented masquerade in all of history, that happened approximately 3,500 years ago. So Jacob dressing up in the garments of Asov. Okay, so to go back to the discussion itself, we all have our masks. So let's suffice it to say some of us were aware of and some were not aware of. Everyone knows, for example, you're going to make a presentation to someone and you're going to a party and you want to impress, you're going to be on your best behavior. That's a normal mask everybody puts on. It doesn't necessarily mean it's false. It doesn't necessarily mean it's deceptive. Yeah, that's how it is. You want to impress somebody, you dress a certain way, you behave more pleasantly. You want to really know what someone's like, you have to go to their home and ask their spouses and ask their family. That's usually where you see more about a person, because that's not where they're impressing. That's where they're more loose and they're more just themselves. Mothers are very good at this. Most of us behave at our worst with our mothers. For some reason, our mothers, since we were in their womb, we just take for granted that you could just do anything. I mean, they saw everything about us, so you might as well just be yourself. So I guess maybe that's one of the most unmasked places is with our mothers. Maybe our fathers too, but I think mother even more so. Because at the end of the day, when you were in your mother's womb, you definitely didn't have any mask because you didn't even have the ability or intelligence to find a mask. And more importantly, you didn't need one. You were just doing what you had to do. And the same thing is with newborn children. So the real study would really be is when do we find our first mask? So I mentioned before one scenario would be where a child sees a disapproving parent or disapproving adult that the child is subjugated to. And the child realizes I have to adjust. Now sometimes that can be for the positive as well. It could be for the positive. For example, a child may not have the right manners, and a parent says, when you go to someone, you say thank you. She could say that's also a mask. The child on its own wouldn't know to say thank you, and you're teaching it. So that's fine. I have no problem with saying, I wouldn't call it a mask. I would call it an education. You're training the child to present an etiquette, so to speak, an etiquette of how to behave. Obviously, the masks I'm referring to and the costumes are far more negative. When you start going against your own nature, where you would, for example, you'd be bubbly or exuberant, and you're told to, as I said, not to smile, or other such unnatural reactions. So if it's persistent, this slowly will develop. A child will develop all kinds of maneuvers to satisfy. Some of us become pleasers, and we're always pleasing at the expense of ourselves, at the expense of what's right. We have to please. We cannot rock the boat. Some people cannot stand confrontation, because confrontation was always treated in the wrong way. Now, obviously, no one has to. There's some people that just can't stand anything but confrontation, and if there's no confrontation, they make sure to create one. There's also that extreme, which also is equally problematic. Some people that thrive on crisis. If there's no crisis, let's create one. So all these things are unnatural because they're not the way it's meant to be. You're creating some type of distorted reaction. But the key to all of this is to recognize two things. Number one, that there are symptoms and there are roots. When a person behaves a certain way, even though that behavior may be despicable or inappropriate and so on, if you're really interested in helping them, you have to distinguish between the cause and the symptoms. The symptoms may be terrible. The cause is often very justified. That doesn't justify any adult behaving in the wrong way. Don't get me wrong. But it's a distinction. It's knowing this is the way the person is acting, but there's a reason why they're acting that way. Not to justify, but simply to understand. And you want to heal something, you want to heal it at the root, not at the symptom level. And the second thing we need to know is a statement I always make here, which is that awareness is half the cure. Knowing an issue, knowing a problem, and knowing that there is a problem is always the beginning, more than half the cure. Because if you don't know a problem, then you're not, or you minimize it, well, you're not going to do anything about it. So those are critical elements in the process of trying to so-called discover who you are as opposed to what you're projecting. So, the famous question when you ask somebody, who are you? Usually they give you their business card, which is just another mask. It's what you do, it's not who you are. Even if it's a noble work, it's what you do. It may reflect what you like to do and may reflect some of who you are. But firstly, most people's jobs are not at all what they like, or they would have ever thought themselves doing. They ended up there either by no choice because they needed a job, or because they're desperate, or because whatever it may be. The statistics show most people don't like their jobs. Statistics also show that most people put on another mask and they start liking their jobs even though they didn't like them initially, because what are they going to do? So you start liking that which you disliked, and you make the best of it. So the idea of understanding yourself, of knowing that you have a mask, that you don't have a mask, is not a simple process. But who wants to suddenly discover in midlife, whatever midlife is, 20 years old, 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old, that this face you've been putting on for so long, that this personality is not really who you are, and it's simply a camouflage of, for whatever reason, that you have now embraced to protect yourself, or whatever other reason that you put on this camouflage, this masquerade. Not a comfortable thing to discover. So that's why I don't believe in doing things cold turkey. It's about awareness, learning about yourself, and the more you learn, the more you understand. So I want to go back, and perhaps a good way to begin here, or we already began, but a good way to discuss it is from the mystical roots of this whole concept. Because interestingly, this discussion is also in Jewish mysticism discussed about God Himself. There's God, as the Torah puts it, in His essential state of being, and there's God as God masquerades and dresses up in what's called garments. Now, of course, this is metaphorical, but the metaphor is, as I said, you can dress up in a garment that either reflects who you are, or a garment that does not reflect, or is neutral, or a garment that absolutely conceals who you are. So, especially in the writings of Kabbalah, Kabbalistic writings of the Arizal, based on the words and the texts of the Zohar, there's much discussion about so-called masquerade that God pulls off in this universe. Because one of the things that the mystics have struggled with is a very fundamental problem, and that is, if God is reality, how is it possible that we don't experience God? How is it possible that we can go about our lives missing the whole central point of existence, that there's a God in here? If God is the creator, and not just the creator, is perpetually creating existence, or to put it in the words of the Kabbalah, the mystics, that is not just perpetually creating. The real nature of existence is godly divine energy. Some even call it breath. This is all divine breath. Then how is it possible that we should be completely unaware of the central driving force of existence? So if you just have some abstract belief in a God, that some supreme creator created the world billions of years ago and then decided to go on a trip somewhere, whatever that means, it's one thing. But according to the mystical teachings, divine energy is something that's continuously here. So is it possible that we should be completely unaware of it? It's a very big question. So we all know, for example, what makes us alive. We'll get into the soul soon. But we know that if a heart, God forbid, is not beating all the time, it's not a good sign, to put it mildly, right? If the brain is not functioning, other vital organs. So though we may not see the heart every moment, but it's not difficult to imagine. You can feel your heartbeat, you can see the blood pumping, you can sense, you breathe. So even though we take it for granted most of the time, but it's not that distant to think, okay, these are the forces that are giving me life. But here too you could ask the same question. What is causing us to breathe? And what causes the heartbeat? What is it, a battery in there? And who placed that battery there? And why did it begin the moment when we were conceived? And what happens after death? So this too can be asked the same question. We preoccupy ourselves most of our lives with the external, superficial level of living. But what makes life be life is something that's far more mysterious. Now, there are definitely philosophers and thinkers, and I'm sure all of us think about it from time to time, but we can live our lives completely oblivious. This is what troubles the mystics. And the answer they give, and I'm primarily talking now about the Arizal, the middle-aged, the 16th century great mystic, maybe the greatest of them all. His name is Isaac Luria. He lived to a very young age. He passed away at age 38. And actually, on the scene in the world, in Tzfat, is where he is, the famous old cemetery there, is his gravesite. There's the mikveh of the Arizal there, which is still today it's used and all that. It's a live spring, cold, very cold. And the Arizal lived there the last year and a half, 2 years of his life, almost 2 years. But he left a monumental amount of teachings. Most of them he did not write himself, were written by his great student of Chaim Vital and some of other students that he had, Yisrael Sarug and others. And he revealed what is known in mystical world, and some of you may be familiar with this. I've definitely spoken about it. What is called the secret of the Tzimtzum. That's what he called it, the Seid HaTzimtzum, the secret of the Tzimtzum. I'll explain in a moment. The Tzimtzum is what he calls, is that he says that before existence as we know it, and before here means conceptual before, not in time, because there was no time. So it's like a state, an earlier state in conceptual time, was all of reality as we know it, or all of reality period, was an all-encompassing, indivisible, divine consciousness, divine presence. And nothing else could emerge when you have such a force that is active and conscious. So what does God do in order to create the universe? In order to create an independent consciousness, means you and I, that we can sit here right now and feel ourselves as independent entities, and I have my interests and my needs and my this and my plans and so on. So he says God created a tzimtzum. A tzimtzum is concealed, contracted, concealed the entire energy, leaving what he calls a black hole. A cholol mokum. Yeah, this is the origination, the first time black hole is used. Black space. Remember, all this is metaphorical, just simply to give us some type of way of understanding it. And within this void, in this vacuum, is where God created the structure of existence as we know it. But by doing this, allowed for an independent consciousness to emerge. So just by way of example, just to make it a little more palatable, think of it as of a teacher who is infinitely more brilliant than all his students. And if he would just allow his ideas to flow, nobody could comprehend them. They'd be too overwhelming. They'd be too profound. So what does this teacher do? The teacher has to contract and conceal all his brilliance, leave so-called space for a student to enter, and then in a slow transmission, think of it like spoon feeding, a narrow thread of light, as the Arizal puts it, the teacher begins to transmit A, B, C, D. Think of ourselves in kindergarten. What do we learn? Aleph, Beis, Gimel, A, B, C. At that point, a child has no clue what the ABC is going to lead them. But without the ABCs, they will not know that there are words, And that will turn into sentences, that will turn into paragraphs, that will turn into stories, that will turn into books, ideas. So the only way to begin, if you start teaching a 2, 3, 45-year-old the brilliant ideas that they will learn when they're 20, 30, 40, at a later age, they'd never get it. So you have to somewhat conceal all this wisdom and knowledge and just give them one step. Here, one spoon, another spoon, another spoon, another spoon. Within this wisdom, within this very narrow flow, is contained a lot more. But from the student's perspective, most of it is concealed. And so concealed the student doesn't even know. A child learning ABC has no clue that this is just the tip of the iceberg of tremendous amount of infinite knowledge out there. That's the example. So, if divine consciousness is present, our consciousness cannot emerge. And in an interesting way, it's very similar to how a child develops. They say today, in child psychology, this is just modern, pretty last a few decades, but in Torah psychology this was always known. There's a stage where they're still trying to figure out what stage does a child realize it's separate from its parent. Because everyone knows that in the first early months a child is not aware of that separation. But there comes a point where a child becomes aware that I'm a separate entity than you. It's the same idea. So we begin with feeling we're part of a whole, and then we begin to develop a so-called separate identity, independent identity. Now, why am I discussing it in detail? Because this is considered to be the first camouflage, the first masquerade, the first concealment, that God must conceal himself for us to be able to be. And this is how the Kabbalists understand independent existence as we know it. So there's a famous, I bring this story it's an anecdote in Toward a Meaningful Life. The debate between the philosopher and the rabbi, whether God exists. So the philosopher is a skeptic, agnostic, atheist, and the rabbi is a believer. And they debate this one's arguments for faith and arguments against faith and so on and so forth. Obviously, arguments like this usually go nowhere, and that's the case here as well. It goes nowhere. At some point, the rabbi, exasperated after these hours of debating, says to the philosopher, I envy you. Because frankly, you think about God all the time. That's great. I frankly think about myself most of the time. And with that, they parted ways. So the philosopher, who respected the rabbi, was very flattered with his so-called compliment, and he shared it with some other rabbis and others, and says, at the end of the day, we debated, but he gave me a compliment. He says, I think about God all the time. He thinks about himself. So after a while, one of his friends says to him, the rabbi did not compliment you. He was insulting you, actually. You didn't even realize it. He was saying to you is this: you think about God all the time. You know why? Because you know that you exist. That's not a question in your mind. So you don't even think about it. I exist. I'm here. I'm self-absorbed. My whole life. I'm here. The question is, does God exist? Maybe yes, maybe not. How, when, where? The rabbi, on the other hand, knows that God exists. That's a given. He doesn't have to think about it. So he thinks about himself all the time. Do I exist? Do I not exist? Am I an illusion? What's the purpose of my existence? This isn't just semantics. Welcome. As I said, we honored the class to Avram Ber ben Yosef Ephraim Halevi. I just wanted to mention it again. So this isn't just semantics, it's two different realities. What do you consider reality? A higher reality, the essence of all of existence, or you? That's what it comes down to. I remember having here good old years, good old times, good old days, these long debates and discussions. I don't debate anyone about God any longer, and I stopped doing that when I was 17 or 18. At my young age, because I realized it usually doesn't go very far. Because at the end of the day, for every proof for God's existence, you can bring a proof against God's existence. And then Karl Popper, the philosopher of science, the Austrian, British philosopher of science, writes that the essence of a scientific theory is that you have to be able to disprove it. And as he says, to say God exists, it can't be scientific because you can't disprove it. You may not be able to prove it, but can't disprove it. Nobody can disprove God exists. How can anyone know for sure? Even the most radical atheists say, I also don't believe in fairies. But I can't disprove that fairies don't exist. That's the way they put it. But as the joke goes, Nietzsche said God is dead, and God said Nietzsche is dead. So the bottom line is that it's not about proofs. It comes down to something which I don't know, for some reason I sensed it a long time ago. It comes down to who do you worship? Either yourself or something greater than yourself. Everybody's worshiping. If someone doesn't have a God in their lives, then the God is yourself. Either you're self-made, or you're self-absorbed, or you're the most important thing in existence. So even Voltaire, the great enlightened atheist, said, if we didn't have a God, we'd have to create one. Because he understood the value of having a God. Now he didn't mean that. He just said he didn't believe. But it's even the greatest. I'm talking about free thinkers, open-minded people will say the concept of God doesn't go away because it is the greatest concept that ever exists. Some say it's an illusion. Some say it's and I remember once giving a class. It was actually on cable TV, and so we were taking it was a live class. Do you remember that? Were you there? And a guy gets up and says, it was a live, so he asks this live question. He says, what's my reaction to the American Psychiatric Association's debate in this year's session, their annual session, where they came to the conclusion that their debate was, is religion just delusional, or is it an actual form of psychosis? That was the debate. And he asked me, what's my opinion on that? So without since it was live, I just said I would ask the psychiatrists that came to that conclusion: do they beat their wives with bats or with chains? So some say, how do you know they beat their wives? I said exactly. You determined that religion is either delusional or psychosis. Just a kind of loaded question is that. In other words, there's definitely something wrong with it. So it's like telling someone, we know that you're a criminal. The question is, do you do this type of crime or that type of crime? How do you know that? Anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is, I try and debate the issue. From the mystical point of view, I go back to what I'm saying, that it's either you worship yourself or you're worshiping something greater than yourself. Simple as that. And all love of another human being, kindness to another person, is only really ultimately possible if you don't worship yourself. Simple as that. You worship yourself, it's inevitable that you will care about yourself more than about anyone else. And this is not about saying without God there's no morality. I don't want to even go into that debate. That's another discussion. I'm just basically saying, if you're worshiping yourself, so what are you going to do when there's enough food only for two people, for one person, and you control it? And what are you going to do if the Nazis are coming to arrest you or somebody else? Who are you going to take care of first? And what are you going to do in any given situation where you come first? So if in most simplistic terms, the concept of a God, the idea of a God, the idea of a higher reality, is simply something more than, it's not all about you. Let's put it that way. If we could teach someone that, you don't need the word God. As you know, I don't care whether you use the word God, Torah. I mentioned many times, you can use completely different language. As a matter of fact, these words tend to actually be turn-offs because they are full of stereotypes. But is it all about you or is it not all about you? And frankly, the most secure people in this world are people who know it's not all about them. It's the most insecure people think that everything is about them because they're fighting for their turf. Okay, so let's go back now to the first masquerade, God. So the Arizal explains the fundamental theological question, dilemma. How is it, if God is the essence of all of reality, when I say essence, how is it that we can be completely oblivious of this force? To the point we can even deny this force. In other words, how could a God create an agnostic universe? And the question goes to drive the point home. There's no person on earth that when they see a painting on the wall will say it just happened. Painting dictates an artist. Even if you never met the artist, even if you don't even know who the artist is, that's it. It dictates an artist. There's no way that painting ended up being created by itself. You see a book, it testifies to an author. You see a building, it testifies to an architect, to someone who built it. You see music, testifies to a composer. No way around that. There's no person on earth that will deny that. And yet, we look at the universe, which is more beautiful than any art, than all the art put together. As a matter of fact, art is copying nature. More beautiful than any music, than any book ever written. Just take one species. Forget about all the millions, billions of species. Take the human body. A healthy human body. Greatest work of art. Greatest efficiency. That in a frame 5-6 feet tall, 100 pounds, 200 pounds. Let's not go higher than that. Such efficiency. It's almost impossible to imagine. Would you create a life? You were given, go create a life. You had nothing to work with. You have no model to work with. What would you do? A human being with all our functions, I would need at least, an earth or two just to create one human being. Because it's so complex. You know the joke where they say the scientists, this joke itself is somewhat of a conundrum, but it goes like this: the scientist says to God, anything you can do, I can do. I don't. You created a world, I can create a world. You created so God says, go ahead. So he takes some earth and he's going to put together and he's going to make a tree grow out of it. So God says, use your own earth. So the question is that if all logic dictates that a product has a producer, why is it when it comes to the world we suddenly can turn agnostic or even atheistic? It's completely illogical. All the explanations in the world. You could say evolution, survival of the fittest. You could say natural selection. Bottom line is this: all you needed was one quirk. I was flying to California a few weeks ago, and I was watching this History Channel. So they had a show for an hour. It was called "What the World Was Like 300 Billion Years Ago," and how it got from there to here. And I'm watching the channel, and it was it blew me away. Do you know how many accidents had to happen for us to exist? And they keep saying the miracle of nature. The miracle of nature that happened to be gravity came out of it and not the opposite of gravity. And that the amphibian decided to crawl out of this side of the ocean. All leading to a life like ours. But God is not allowed in the discussion. And it was fascinating to me because the greater the case they made, the more case for a creator was there. So it's like the big elephant in the room. So who put the first ball of gas there that gave it this intelligence to continue going? You know the Chelm story. The guy, Chelm is one of these towns, old towns that were fools. A guy goes out to the big city and first time he sees an engine, a locomotive, a train. He comes back to his town, he says, the most amazing thing, I see a car, and a horse is moving, and a horse is not pulling it. So everybody says, really? So how's the car moving? He says, there's another car behind it pushing it. And who's pushing the second car? He says, the third car. And who's pushing the fourth car? As many cars as you go. And who's pushing the last car? He said, I don't know, I forgot to ask. That's a technicality. So yes, you could have the whole explanation of everything, but the first ball of gas, I'm not here to make the case for God. I'm just wondering, how is it that we suddenly turn agnostic when all our logic always tells us a production means there's a producer. Here's the greatest production ever, no producer. So the Arizal answers the question very simple, because God created an agnostic universe. He deliberately, intentionally camouflaged his presence. Why? We'll discuss why soon. And hid his presence in order to allow us to be. Because if he didn't, there would be no independent entity like ourselves. Which is, I've told this once to a very, very distinguished atheist that I personally know. And he said to me, that's brilliant, because I can never dispute that. To say God created an agnostic universe, I never thought of that. That would mean that I'm agnostic or atheist because God created a universe that allows me to be that. He didn't like that at all. He says, you're taking credit even for agnostics now. God is taking credit even for the atheists. Yeah, that's true. Look, it's only because the Declaration of Independence says all men are created equal. Because they're created by God, that's why we're all equal, including atheists. So I asked him, I said, if you were the writer of the Declaration of Independence, would you grant equality to non-atheists as much as you would to atheists? He said, it's a good question. So I said, believers will do that because God created us all. Anyway, the point I'm making all of this is that there is a deep camouflage, a deep deception going on, which is an essential component, especially in Arizal's Kabbalah, mysticism. I always wonder when I think about the scientists, we all know, and I can personally testify, that there's a lot of religious dogma out there. Religious fanatics I don't know if the word religion really is appropriate to use for them, but they call themselves that. And they're not thinking, and they just say whatever they say in the name of God, whether it's obnoxious or not obnoxious. So, I understand the critique we can have against that. But what about, we have also radical atheists. So I once asked a number of scientists, it always annoys them when I say this, but I say, look, the fact that someone is a religious fanatic, okay, you can explain that because their religion, that's where they come from, or that's where their dogma is. But the word dogma in science should not exist. So why don't you, as a scientist who questions whether God exists or denies God's existence, why don't you at least acknowledge, we all know that you need to always provide disclaimers and have full transparency. Say the following: I have vested interest in no God, because if there's a God, then I'm accountable and I'm responsible, and there's consequences in my life. Every judge has to recuse himself or herself if he has self-interest. There is an interest, just like a religious person has interest in God. You have interest that there is no God because you gain from that. So why doesn't any scientist ever just make that statement? So every scientist I always tell is they all get angry at me, because for them that's just unacceptable. They think that they're most honest, objective people. They do, But actually, one person recently sent me something from Aldous Huxley, and he was the only thinker who actually writes that. He writes, I come to the conclusion, let's put it, all my arguments against the God is based on one thing: selfish gain. I want to be free, especially in the sexual arena. And therefore, all my arguments are based on getting myself that freedom. So therefore, my non-belief in God is based on personal benefits. I can respect that simply because he's honest. He's saying it the way it is. And that's why he doesn't want to have an artist creating all this art. He has no problem with a building being built by an architect, but he has a problem with the universe being created by God, because that means we're created by God, and that means we may have to be accountable. That's a fair disclaimer, so to speak. Whether he's right or not is another story, but that's what he claimed. So to go back to the camouflage, that's really, I got a little off track here, but it's not completely off track, as you'll see. What's the purpose that God camouflaged himself? Why did he create this mask? As I said, without that we wouldn't be here to talk about it. But the deeper reason is because he wanted a partnership. He wanted human beings created in the divine image to have a battle, to have to really deal with the biggest question of all, to come into an agnostic universe and discover truth for themselves. It's almost like what a healthy, loving parent wants of their child. You don't want to be walking for your child or talking for your child. It's true, every child, they take the first step, they will fall. More than once. But a healthy parent is not going to stop the child from falling. The healthy parent will say to the child, look, I'm watching you, I'm there for you, I'll pick you up, you won't be hurt, I'll be there, but you walk. Now, a parent that does not allow a child to spread their wings or to grow up and become independent, that's a problem. But any healthy parent knows that real parenting means it's a combination. Obviously, none of us want our children to make mistakes, and we would try to prevent that. But there comes a point your child will be 18, 19, 20, and they have to learn just like you learned. And you do not want at that point to say, I don't want them to make mistakes, so I'm not going to let them make choices. I won't let them go to any school. I want to watch them 24/7. What will happen with a child like that? I always give the analogy of the butterfly. So a butterfly, we all know, emerges from a cocoon, a chrysalis. That was once a caterpillar that wrapped up in this cocoon, and then after a while it goes to a metamorphosis, and you have a butterfly. So once a man was observing, the analogy goes, he's watching a butterfly starting to emerge. The cocoon is starting to open up, like an egg cracking, and sees the butterfly struggling to get out. But it's a difficult struggle because the cocoon is still keeping the butterfly trapped in there. The guy, in his great compassion and mercy, decides to take a knife and just cuts open the cocoon and lets the butterfly free. And he's smiling, he's so happy he let the butterfly free. The butterfly doesn't have to struggle. And he's waiting for this beautiful winged butterfly with his multicolors to take flight. Well, he waits and waits. The butterfly never flies ever. Why? Because in his great compassion, what he did was destroy the butterfly's life. Because the pressure the butterfly needs to force a liquid into its wings, which give it the right aerodynamics to be able to fly, never takes place because he got rid of this pressure. The butterfly struggling out of the cocoon is part of its development. That's what gives it the strength, as I said. It forces liquid into its wings, it can fly. So one must be very careful when we try to help someone get out of their comfort, help someone enter a comfort zone. Sometimes struggles are necessary. God should help us all. Our struggles shouldn't be more than necessary, and shouldn't be the ones that are painful or negative and so on. But there's a natural struggle, and it's exactly how God created the universe. He concealed His presence and says, now you struggle, and you force that liquid into your wings, and then you can fly. And then when you fly, you will have done it on your own. That's what I want. Now, why God wants that is another discussion out of the scope of this class. But it's the greatest gift. And the mystics talk about this. Why would God want it? And so on. It's the greatest gift. The greatest gift to somebody is to give someone not knowledge and information, to give them the abilities, methodologies that they can grow on their own. What's a greater gift than you can give than that? If God ever comes and says to you, Akashal, you have one prayer to ask for. So most people would say, give me peace and happiness and money and just all my comforts. A perfect life. A life without pain, without challenge. That's what many people would ask for. The wise people would ask, as King Solomon, even though he asked for wisdom, but clearly he had some wisdom to be able to ask for wisdom. You need to have wisdom to understand the value of wisdom. What did King Solomon ask for? He asked for wisdom. He didn't ask, get rid of all my problems, make sure I never suffer, because he understood that the world has challenges. The greatest blessing you could have is not that they'll be painless, is that any challenge that comes your way, you have the tools to deal with it. A great swimmer is not someone that just everything comes easy. He knows how to navigate. That's the greatest blessing you can have. That whatever comes your way, you will have the tools, the wisdom, the fortitude, the strength to deal with. This was always the way of the Jews. Obviously, no one wants a Holocaust, God forbid, or any other such tragedy. But what came out of all of it was what? Was Jews who said, I don't know why it happened. I hate what happened. It was horrible. But I'm not going to die because of it, because I have strength, deeper strength to deal with anything. Nothing can kill me. That type of resilience, strength is divine. And that's ultimately really the struggle of life. That there's nothing that can overcome you. You're not a victim. You're not a victim of someone else's circumstances or your own circumstances. You have whatever it needs to forge ahead in this life, and not just to survive, to thrive, you have within you. Your biggest enemy is your own lack of confidence in yourself, which is why we need each other. So God camouflaged Himself, created a world with masks. And it's exactly how the Kabbalists put it. I don't know if you've ever studied any of Kabbalistic language, you'll find words like curtains, veils, shrouds, kalim, containers, channels, strands. It's all about concealments. Sometimes the concealments are, and very similar actually, if you study any engineering or technology, you find the same thing. Any circuit, any piece of technology built is filled with what? With all kinds of ways how you transmit energy from one state to another without blowing the circuits. So you need to know how to contain it. Let's say electricity running into this room. If you just were connected straight to the main in the street, these light bulbs would burn out in this moment. They would explode. It's all about as I said before, the narrow thread of the kav, of the flow. That the flow has to be measured perfectly, not too much and not too little. That is essentially a form of masking and veiling and shrouding. And there are many words, as I said, used in Kabbalistic terminology. It begins with the big tzimtzum, as I mentioned, the great concealment. That changes and transforms the whole reality from a divine consciousness to a self-consciousness. Because if divine consciousness prevails, there's no room for our independence. So the tzimtzum basically inverted reality. Instead of seeing existence from the inside out, we see it from the outside in. As I mentioned before, the big dilemma. What's the hand and what is the glove? You look out the skies This is the glove. Where's the hand inside the glove? It's elusive. It's difficult to find. Does that make sense? That the glove should be more dominant in our lives than the hand? But that's because of the tzimtzum, it turned everything inside out. So the mask is what we experience. We see the outer first. You meet another person, what do you see first? You see their body language. You see their face. You see their external expression. We all know that's not where it begins. How do you see yourself? From the inside out. When you wake up in the morning, you don't need to look in the mirror, hopefully, to know what you feel like. Some people do. They look in the mirror and say, what do you think today? What do you think about what's going on? Some people actually have to call someone else and ask them, how should I feel today? I'm exaggerating a bit, but you get the idea. But in a healthy situation, you have a feeling within, and then it's expressed. But everything else we experience is from the outside in. That means that we see the masks first, and then we travel inward. People who become attuned to the spirituality of the hand within the glove, when they see someone, the mask means nothing. They can see right behind the mask. So it's a little frightening, actually, to meet people like that, because imagine being transparent, that you're seen in ways you don't even see yourself. I remember once being in Sfat, actually, a number of years ago, maybe when we traveled there, I don't remember when it was, but I met a guy, he was hanging around in the old cemetery there, and he looked like an old-timer from Sfat, and he said to me, yes, his family lives here already almost 400 years. Son of generations back to the time of the Arizal. And he said to me, I'll tell you something, you look like a guy that may be able to use this, so I want to share this with you. I'll tell you a story I heard from my father, who heard it from his parents, from their parents, all the way back 400 years ago. He says the Arizal would spend most of the week by the Kinneret. The Kinneret is a little sea there, the Sea of Galilee it's called. It's shaped like a harp, that's why it's called Kinneret in Hebrew. So, like a harp. So he says he would spend most of the week by the sea studying and meditating. He would come back, not the whole week, but he would come back often he'd always come back for Shabbos. When he came back Friday, everyone knew when he would come, and he would walk the street back to his house. And everybody would cover their face. He says this was known because they knew that Arizal could see behind the mask. So people would cover their face. He just shared that with me, It wasn't a miraculous story. It was just he says, this is something my father told me. It was always known that Arizal was able to see. So there are people who see and there are people who see. I'm sure some of us here, some of you here, you get a sense, someone walks into a room, you feel the vibe. You come to a certain party, you could feel that the hosts are at war or something like that. You don't even need to see anything, you just feel it's like tense. So, and some of us read faces better than others. Some people are very good at masking things and you really can't read. So we live in a world that's all masks. And it all began with God's mask. So we live in a world where the external matters more than anything. The package is more important than sizzle, more than the steak, as they say. The package is more important than the product. So you can buy yourself a whole product, and the product ends up being this, but the package, it looks good. Now sometimes the product is also good, but often if the package is good, people will buy it even if the product isn't good. Advertising, marketing. Madison Avenue cynics put it this way: it's not important what happened, it's important what people think happened. So what does that tell you? In the words of some of the Hasidic masters, Alma de Shikra, it's a false world. The world is a false place. It's duplicitous, it's deceptive. This doesn't mean there's no truth in this world. It just means that it doesn't mean everyone's lying all the time, but it means everyone could be lying all the time and get away with it. It's a world where some say, you say one thing with your mouth and another with your heart. It's only young children that are seamless because they're not so masked yet. And the challenge of life is how do we pierce the mask, reveal that which is within, and not be deceived. Now masks are important. We do need. Look what happened with Adam and Eve. They were in the Garden of Eden. It says they were naked. Why? Because they did not sense their sexuality. They were not self-conscious. Like a newborn child. Sexuality is pure. It's part of God's creation. Then Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge. Suddenly they became aware of themselves. And now developed what's called shame. So they cover themselves. The birth of the garment industry, which in a number of years would also turn into the mask industry. And then disguises and costumes upon costumes upon costumes upon costumes. And layers upon layers and layers. Now, It's important to have healthy shame, because it's a recognition that I'm conscious and some things have to be covered up out of dignity, out of respect, and so on. But in a true world, you know what it says when Mashiach will come? You know what it says? It says, "Lo yikanef oid merecha." Our master will no longer be concealed in a garment. Our eyes will see the face. What did God ask? The ultimate request Moses asked God: show me your face. This is, if you read the chapter Kisisa, which is when Moses is on the mountain the last time, and he comes down in Yom Kippur, it's really the most romantic story you'll ever read. The romance between God and Moses keeps saying to God, show me your face. That's the ultimate thing, what a lover wants to say. I want to see your face. I want to see the real you, basically. Not as you're concealed in garments, and not as you manifest in all these different layers. I want to see the real you. And God says, no man can see me and live. Which seems like, okay, then it means it's impossible. But it's not so. The Panim Yofis, all comment and ask the question, then God says to the you'll see my back. And God says, you'll not see my face. What's the point of rubbing it in? God just said, no man can see me and live. Why emphasize my face you will not see? Because afterwards God says, my back I will show you. Which means a revelation of myself, a garment. I'll show you myself through a garment. The example would be a teacher can give you the idea, and then they give you a metaphor for the idea. The metaphor is like a garment. And the answer given is a tremendous answer. The way you're supposed to read the verse is God says, I will show you my back and my face. But if you want to see my face, it will be by not looking. Some things you see by looking, and some things you see by not looking. Humility. You want to see the essence of another person, you want to be honored to see someone in their complete nakedness, and I mean in the purest form of it, you need humility. You can't come with your ego. You have to be completely naked. And that's what God was saying. You can see my face, but you can't want it that much. By not looking for it, by not pursuing it, it will emerge. That was the response. So to go back to our discussion here, so camouflage and masks are very intentionally created in this world. The problem is, as I said earlier, at the beginning of this class, is the masks that we develop due to unhealthy circumstances. The most classic is what I mentioned before, a child growing up in a home where the parents disapprove of the child, or disapprove of the child's behavior, or demand different standards than the child's natural instincts. What will the child do? After a while, the child will relent, will surrender, and say, you want me to smile when I'm not feeling like I should smile? This child will put on a mask and will become a pleaser, or some other form of a mask. That's the classic form of when you have the classic form of how masks are developed. They're basically armor and defense mechanisms that begin to grow on us because we're protecting ourselves. And our protection comes either because we want to satisfy someone, or because we feel it's dangerous if we don't, and so on. How many people, I've met children of raging alcoholics, people who grew up in homes where their parents were absentee, with parents who didn't want to blame themselves, they blamed their children. You can't imagine the creative ways, bizarre, creative, so painful, ugliest ways, and obscene ways that children maneuver just to satisfy their parents, and will create all kinds of craziest mechanisms. And then it becomes your mask, and then your mask becomes you. At some point, as I said, you can't even distinguish: is this me, or is this my protection? So you could say, well, what do you do then? What happens when your mask melts into your face, and your face is your mask, and we don't even know what your real face would look like? Well, that's why I mentioned before, thank God there is a God in here somewhere. So behind all these camouflages, there's a divine force that even gave you the wisdom to build a mask. So the thing is to discover what is that force and know. But the first step to get there is awareness. If you are happy with your life, even though your life is a complete masquerade, and you're fooling everybody, even yourself, and you don't even know it, how can you get out of that trap? You are deceived yourselves. It's like the Baal Shem Tov says, the ultimate worst mask is the mask that masks the mask. As he puts it, Hanoichi haster aster as panai. I covered and concealed my face twice. Covered and concealed my face. She says, what's the double concealment? She says, there's a concealment. You know, you're wearing a mask. You know, it's dark now. Then there's another concealment. It conceals the fact that there's a mask. It conceals that you think there's no mask. This is me. Hey, I'm not hiding anything. This is the real me. And I'm not necessarily talking about someone who's lying. They don't think they're lying. They really think this is the real them. That's the worst part of it all. In the olden days in Russia, there was no air conditioning. So how did people relieve themselves from very hot, from heat waves? So they would go down to these dark cellars where it was cool, but no electricity, so there was also no light. So one goes down to one of these cellars just to get some little to cool off. He comes down there, it's so dark. He says, it's so dark down here. So someone else says, don't worry, stay here a little while, you get used to it. So he ran, I said, that's exactly what I'm worried about. One doesn't want to get used to it. I don't want it to become my comfortable, the darkness is my comfort zone. So, we all have our masks, and they may have served a role at some point. If a real person, it looks to find ways to free themselves. So how does this all relate to the story with Jacob? Dressing up in the garments of Asov. It's also a nice masquerade. If you happen to be going to a Halloween party, maybe that's what you should do. Dress up like in the garments of Jacob or Asov. I didn't even want to mention that, but since I couldn't resist. So this is a fascinating analogy from the Baal Shem Tov that helps us understand everything I've been discussing. It's one of my favorites because it just captures so much what reality is like, and what reality is and what reality is not. And you see like a direct challenge to the perception of what we think is real. I know it may sound weird, but most of us, what do we think is real? So money, everybody thinks is real. That's for sure. That's hands down. Some of us also think our physical reality is real, our bodies, our needs, our food, our drink, and so on. And then there are the things that we begin to question. Are they real? Is the soul really real? The things basically that are invisible, that we don't experience with our sensory tools, to us become questionable. Which, if you really think about it, is almost insane, because basically you decide which tools you want to follow. Is love real? Now, some people who've been hurt in love and don't want to be hurt by love say it's not real either. So there again, they have a subjective reason for saying that. Is the truth real? Is the spirit real? So today, it's a good question. If you ask a physicist, interestingly, physics once upon a time may have said something different. Today, if you ask a physicist, what's more real, matter or energy? Without hands down, energy. Though you don't see energy, only see matter. We all know matter is just a form of energy. It's the visible form of energy. The tip of the iceberg is what you see. But what's real? Is it an iceberg or is it a tip? So the fact that someone says, because I perceive what I perceive, that makes it real, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that's a very limited. That's saying, what I see is real, that's all. So I'll get to the analogy of the Baal Shem Tov in a moment. I want to give another analogy first. It's a classic one. Who said it? I think it was Sir Arthur something or other. Arthur Wellington, not Wellington. One of the scientists in the mid-20th century. So he was asked, how do you come to all these, I don't know if you're familiar with quantum mechanics, bizarre conclusions about the properties of the microscopic world. Completely counterintuitive. There's no state of everything is in states of probability, indeterminism. They call the fuzzy physics. That things do not have, that things are in improbable states as opposed to definite states. They're not my words; these are words from physicists. So obviously, you can imagine every scientist who was exposed to these experiments, come away thinking this was ridiculous. And it took decades upon decades. Einstein refused to accept the conclusions of quantum mechanics. He refused to accept it. His words were, God doesn't play dice with the universe. To which another Jew responded, Niels Bohr said to him, don't tell God what to do. So, the point is, so they asked this scientist, how do you come to these weird conclusions? When we don't have anything that is similar to it in the macroscopic world, meaning in the observable empirical universe. So he responded with an analogy of a fisherman who spread a net across all the 7 seas and started gathering fish of all types. And And then he began documenting the different types of fish, species, colors, shapes. After long research and documentation, he comes to a great conclusion, which he's about to announce to the Academy of all the wizards of the world. And that is that there are no fish in the sea that are shorter than a half-inch long. Okay, well, I guess one of his little children reads this, he hears his announcement by the dinner table that tomorrow he's about to announce this big thing. So a child, the emperor with no clothes, the children just say the way it is. No masks, no camouflage. Just says to the scientist, says, well, let's look at the net you use. What kind of net did you use? And lo and behold, surprise, surprise. What is the net? The spaces of the ropes of the net are all half-inch wide and long. So obviously every fish that was shorter than a half-inch long fell back into the sea. So his wise wife tells him, so no problem, make the announcement, but just say that when you use a net that has half-inch spaces, you're never going to find fish that are shorter than a half-inch long. Now you're not going to win the Nobel Prize for such a brilliant conclusion, because that's obvious. He didn't need to go through the whole bother. In other words, it's the tools you used. You're using tools with your eyes to say, my eyes don't see my love. My eyes don't see my ideas. So what? Use different tools, and you won't see them. You'll experience them a different way. That's the problem. The problem is that we worship our tools. So you're saying, from your perspective, this is reality. That's the most you can say. But let me hear your perspective. I want to know what tools you used before you give me your brilliant conclusions. So here's the analogy of the Baal Shem Tov that just puts into context what reality is. So everyone knows, you ask, for example, free association, Jewish holidays. People, knee-jerk reaction. What do you associate with? Most people say food. I tested this. Food. Jewish holidays, right? Okay, here we go. Hanukkah coming, latkes, potato latkes. Or savganiyot, which is jelly donuts. Okay. Purim, hamantashen, or kreplach. Passover, of course, has its own series with matzah, and there's a whole series of special recipes, etc. Then you have Shavuos' blintzes. Then, of course, even Yom Kippur, you don't eat food. It's also an obsession not to eat. It's also food. And on Erev Yom Kippur, the day before, you eat double, just in case you could die from hunger on Yom Kippur. And then, of course, there's Rosh Hashanah with the apple and the honey and the sweet fruits and the sweetness and the other special fruits, foods. And new fruit, food. And I remember driving back once from Manhattan a few years ago. It was the radio said there'll be a blizzard, and there actually was. It was one of the times the weather report actually predicted right. Very rare, but it happens. A broken clock is also right twice a day. So so I'm driving home from Manhattan, and at the same time there was this Amber Alert. Do you remember these security alerts after September 11th? An Amber Alert, which I guess was a higher alert that whatever, some terrorists, I'm not laughing at it. And so it was a very interesting contrast, the Jackie Mason style. So I'm driving down 2nd Avenue, and I see literally lines outside the hardware stores buying duct tape. Duct tape, as if it's going to help, but duct tape to protect for a gas attack or whatever. I mean it. Okay, that was one of the things he bought, duct tape. There were a few things, flashlights, etc. And then I drove through Williamsburg, over the bridge. In Williamsburg, I'm talking about Hasidic Williamsburg. And there's also lines out the door. But it's a different type of store. It's pastrami shops. They're preparing for the blizzard. And I said to myself, so who survived through the thousands of years? The guys that bought the duct tape or the guys that bought the pastrami? So don't dismiss food. What do you think about that? Interesting, right? So next time, if you want to survive, you follow the number. So anyway, so food. So here's the question: what's so spiritual about food? Holidays. That's food. I mean, that's something to really it's like enlightening and emancipating and transcendental. So the Baal Shem Tov gives the following analogy. Actually, gives it another context of why Hasidim say l'chaim from time to time. And the analogy is the following: of a king, an ailing and aging king, who knows his time is coming, and he wants his son to inherit the throne. But his son is a spoiled brat. I don't know, that's not exact the words the Baal Shem Tov uses, but the son is growing up in a palace and he's catered to. He has a minister and he has people take care for everything, all his needs. Never earned his way. The father is a wise man and says, you know what, I want my son to earn his way. As long as he lives here in the palace, he will always be spoiled and he'll never really be sensitive. So he says, I'm going to send you away to a distant land where no one recognizes you, and you're going to have to earn your own right. You're going to have to grow and build, and that way you'll earn. One day you'll become a wise and sensitive leader. The father knows fully well that once he sends his son away, after time the son may forget where he's coming from and will not even return. So he decides wisely to send his child a letter several times a year, reminding him, I'm your father, the king, you're being groomed to be a great leader one day, and please remember that. When the son gets the letter, so yes, he does forget, and when the letter comes, it reminds him, and he suddenly wants to celebrate. But who is he going to celebrate with? If he tells the townspeople, listen, I'm going to be one day the king, your king, and they'd say you're either crazy or they'd be resentful. So he comes up with a great idea. He announces, for no particular reason, he says, free cocktails, a free party. I'm throwing a big kiddush, a big barbecue, free food for everybody, free drinks. So obviously everybody comes running, okay, free meal, great. Everybody's celebrating because they're getting free food. And meanwhile, he's celebrating with them. They're all dancing together. And in his heart, he's dancing because he received a letter from his father. That's the analogy. But here's the moral of the story. So God is the king, and every soul is the child in the divine palace. In the spiritual worlds, we have no challenges. There are no masks, there are no camouflages. At least relative to this world. So in that reality, we never earn our way because we're protected and taken care of. We don't have to deal with any type of independence. So the king says, no, I want you to earn your way, and I have confidence that you will. I will put you in a foreign land where no one recognizes you. I'll put you in a land where you won't even recognize yourself, because the soul is taught the entire Torah in its mother's womb, and then you're made to forget. You enter in this world consciously, completely clueless. We're clueless. We don't know that we have a mission, and even when someone tells us, we question, is there a God, is there no God? As I mentioned before, we're, maybe not. We know is this material reality, what we can touch and feel. Like one guy said to me, I don't trust anything that I can't count. He started doing this. He meant money. Anything else I don't trust. Okay, great. Good luck for him. He's not going to take his money where in the next world. So there they don't count things like that. There they count, as they say, receipts, not checks. So we're thrown to this thrust in this world, but it's not for no reason. It's to earn the right on our own that we've come to understand what it means to be a real person. In heaven, in Gan Eden, in the spiritual realms, there's no effort. You're in the palace. So we're thrown into a world which is camouflages and masks the true reality of our existence, of our reality, of our lives. But we're made to forget, as I said. So what does God do? He sends several letters a year to us. These are the holidays. I'm sending you a letter. I want to remind you that you don't belong. You're not of this world. You're a soul on a physical journey, not a body on a spiritual journey. You're a soul that's going through a physical stage of your life's journey. Now the soul wants to celebrate, but here's the problem: the body doesn't have any clue what spirituality is. The body is busy with its going through all its important priorities, as they say. So God says, you know what? Give the body free cocktails and food. Feed it kreplach, kishke, kugel, cholent. For some reason, disproportionate amount of kosher foods begin with a K. I don't really know why. Kugel, kishke, kartoffel, kreplach. If you have any theories, I'd be happy to hear. Anyway, but and you feed the body. The body is going to celebrate because it's getting good food, free drinks. Hey, holiday, why not? I'm ready for any party. And meanwhile, the soul can celebrate because the real meaning behind this holiday is the letter from God. is the message that you come from a spiritual place. That's the Baal Shem Tov's analogy. Now, obviously, we have to add, sadly, that most of us only know about the free cocktails and don't even know about that there's a letter. That's not even in the analogy. That's when things get really messed up. So most Jews who celebrate a holiday, all they know, great food. That's all they know. No one even knows there's a message. Someone say, "What's the message?" I don't know. They're serving shont. I'm going to the Kiddush. That's all I know. I didn't know there was a message. And I said, "What's the difference between Rosh Hashanah, between Shavuos and Chanukah?" Well, that's blintzes and latkes. Any other difference? Yeah, Passover is 8 days. Chanukah is 8 days. Hey, great. That's what most people know. That's the sad part. But when you study the soul of Judaism, you see right away, a holiday is a spiritual experience. It's a spiritual journey. It's a spiritual channel of spiritual energy. Every holiday has its own message. The story, in my opinion, this analogy is a tremendous analogy about all of life. And this is what happened with Jacob and Asov. Why did Jacob dress up in the garments of Asov? Asov represents the hunter. In this world, to be able to survive, you cannot just be a spirit. You have to get into a body. But never think that you are the body. That's simply the garments you use. You use the tools, like it says in the Medrash. It says when you come to a city, you follow its customs. We speak language, we speak English, whatever language it is. But don't ever think that the garment is the purpose. The problem is that we have replaced the garment and made it instead of the means is the end. The whole purpose of this physical world is to be a container, a glove to a hand. If you think the glove becomes the hand, that's where the tragedy is. So we all have our masks, and we sometimes need them. It's no different than when a teacher teaches a student with a metaphor. Metaphor is a mask. But if the student never gets beyond the mask and never gets to the idea that's behind the metaphor, that's a problem. So we always have to convey things on the terms. The soul could not speak to our bodies if our bodies did not get anything for it. But don't ever think it's the chant of the kishka. It's just a incentive. It's just a distraction, frankly, just to get the body to come along for the ride, or else it won't come. Because there's nothing. What's in it for me? The body wants to know. It's in for you. The Kiddush has a good buffet. Okay, that's in it for you. But meanwhile, there's a far deeper message. So essentially, it's how we look at life. The job you have in your life, the places you're going to travel to, everything you do today, tomorrow, these are simply garments that your soul is entering into to achieve a deeper mission and to bring a higher reality into this world, a higher consciousness. The problem is we become our jobs, and we become the end, and we forget the message. This is the whole meaning of Hashgacha Pratis, that divine providence. God leads the footsteps of a person. If you step back for a moment and of the whole hoo-ha, the whole immersion of your life and your business, just step back for a moment. What are the real priorities? What will it look like in 100 years from now? What legacy will remain? Think anyone's going to really care what you did, every machination you did day by day in your business and so on? As important as it is to you, it's a very narrow perspective. It's down below. What's the bird's eye view? The bird's eye view is, what did you fulfill the purpose of why you were sent to this earth? But how many people think about that? And we have so many distractions today. And with technology, it's just become complete overload. We have so many ways to distract ourselves, and we forget about the soul of the matter. So the challenge is, and I go back now to the original discussion, what about the masks we have that become our armor? Well, look, you have two choices. You either remain enslaved to your armor and to your masks and to your camouflages, or you finally find a way to get out of it. And the first step is to know that you are never your mask. Even those that served you to protect you, that's not who you are. And if you become defined by that, what can I say? I meet people, I sometimes don't know how in a natural way they're going to ever wake up to deeper awareness. And I don't always I don't always feel comfortable to be the one that makes them uncomfortable. Sometimes it won't help anyway, so what difference does it make? But everybody has their moment, Sadly, in this world, because life does not stay static, there are losses, there are deaths, there are cracks in our lives that usually wake us up. As Leonard Cohen says, the cracks, that's how the light gets in. Now, no one should have a crack. I wish everybody never has any trauma and no loss and no pain. My sincerest blessing. But that's not life. Life doesn't work that way. Life has transitions. That's how it is. And it's the transitions that are actually opportunities to wake up. And sometimes we need to hit something that just challenges us in a very profound way to wake up, because it's often hard to just initiate it. But the fact of the matter is, it's always there right beneath the surface. The soul is trapped in an agnostic universe where it's very easy to deny and be distracted by the rest of our lives. Strangely, and not that I'm suggesting turning back the clock, when our grandparents and our ancestors suffered, they didn't have the luxury of the comforts we have. So they had no choice but to turn to the world of spirit, because their physical world wasn't working so well. Our physical world works great, so to speak, ostensibly at least. The machines are there, the technology is there. The worst problem is your mobile phone, you lose your reception. That's like, tragedy for some. So we live in a world where there's such material comfort and prosperity that it becomes increasingly challenging to know that there's something else ticking inside. But that's where it comes down to where you are. Each of us is in a different place. As I said, often happens when you hit rock bottom or something really doesn't work, you suddenly realize that there's so much more to what's going on. And sometimes we don't. But the fact of the matter is, the one that suffers most of all your issues is yourself, whether you know it or not. If you're trapped behind your masks, you're the one that is not, your potential is not being actualized. That's what always brings me to tears, when I see somebody who's like their own worst enemy, and he has such a beautiful soul waiting to be released, and they just will not let you yourself will not let your own self emerge. With all the explanations and fears and insecurities, that's the saddest thing of all. Obviously, it's sad if someone's hurting another person, which is inevitable. If you're hurting yourself, you're going to hurt others. But the hurting of your own self, it's almost unforgivable, because only you can protect yourself. Who's going to protect you if not yourself? And it's hard to sometimes convey that to someone, because no one wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that I'm doing that. They'll always either blame somebody else or they minimize it. But that's the reality. Our masks, our masquerades that are there for whatever reason to cover up on our insecurities and fears, become us, and then they don't let the real you ever emerge. I can't say ever, but make it difficult to emerge. So we have a week where Yaakov dresses in the garments of Asov, understanding very well, these are garments, I need to wear them for a particular purpose. But then I take them off. As simple as that. And there's the real me. One of the reasons we have Shabbos, by the way, is 6 days a week. You dress up in the garments, and then one way you're just yourself. This is the day of spirit. Unfortunately, Shabbos has become for many just a day of eating shalom and having kiddushes. So just another, the only thing is I don't do it in a restaurant, I do it in the shul, And for some people they keep Shabbos, but they're not Shabbosdik. So it's like someone who eats kosher is not kosher. It's not doing it, it's the spirit of it. So there's a soul behind it all, and the soul is waiting to be freed. If you're committed to yourself, your own self-interest should dictate that the most important thing is for you to become yourself, to express yourself, for you to find that voice and have the courage to not let yourself be trapped by your past with masks and disguises. So look, you could assess how good of a disguise artist you are. Is that the expression, disguise artist? Not really, there's another expression. There's escape artist, but there's also... Con artist. Okay, that's not bad, a con artist, okay. But at the end of the day, you're conning yourself more than anybody else. And that's a tragedy. So my friends, in this week where we read about a masquerade, and it's meant to teach us about looking at our own masks, and realize there's a mask. Sometimes, yes, you need to put it on for a particular purpose, but don't ever become that which you are. Don't ever become your mask. That's the key. Like they say, everybody's got flaws, but don't make a philosophy out of them. An ideology out of it. And like saying everybody else does the same thing or something like that. So I bless everybody here to be able to be the real you, and hopefully have friends where you can just be yourself. It's the greatest thing to have, is someone you can just talk to without any of need of putting up defenses and all kinds of manipulations and maneuverings. And if you could find even one friend like that, it's a great, what can I say, healing experience. Because it shows that you could trust, and it shows that there are people you can talk to. It's true, there are many manipulative people in this world that we have to protect ourselves from. So that's where wisdom comes in. You know who to talk to, who not to talk to. Obviously, not everyone is going to. People do betray, and so on. So you have to have discretion. But that doesn't. It's not an excuse to lock yourself in a fortress where you never let anyone in and you never let anyone out. Because as I said, you will not get out either. It's a two-way street. If you don't let anyone in, you can't get out either. That's how it works in this world. And God obviously knew how to masquerade himself to the point where he created a universe like ours, but it's not airtight. You pierce the surface and you can find deeper truths. There's plenty of challenges to that, but that's why we give each other strength in this regard. So I wish everybody a week of freeing yourself from some of your masks, and you'll be surprised how much a burden will be lifted from your shoulders, because there's a lot of investment in living a life where you constantly have to perform or project. You're putting a lot of energy in that type of, and if you're able to just free yourself of that investment, you can just discover that this energy could be placed in things that are far healthier. Just imagine what you'd be like. I always think to myself how much energy people are investing in dealing with protecting themselves, the fears, insecurities, all the stuff we do emotionally. It's just, it's hard to even, I don't know if we could even quantify it, because we can't even know how much energy, but a lot of energy goes into fighting demons. When so much energy, when all that free energy can go toward building angels. So, build your angels and discover the angel within each of us, the soul that is waiting to be released, and hopefully we all can help support each other in this regard, because it's always good to have the synergy, the dynamic of different people. Confidence comes when you're around people with confidence. That joke they tell about this guy who went to train for paratrooping. So he goes up there in the plane, and there's the whole month of training where you're watching others, the maneuvers and how you dress up and how you jump and all the whole thing. And the month passes, the turn comes, and the commander says, "Okay, it's your turn." So yeah, he gets online. He's about to looks down. Oh, no, I can't do that. He pulls back. Okay, we have that too. Another month of training till you build up the courage. Make a long story short, another month passes. It's his turn. This time to jump. No, he's not jumping. Okay, so the commander says, "Listen, not everybody. This isn't made for everyone. Get yourself an administrative job or some other job that you can deal with on Earth. You're not a paratrooper, and that's that. You need to have a certain." So he says, "No, I want to stay here. I want to help out. I'll help out on the plane. I'll store things. I'm administrator, whatever you need for me." He says, "Why? You're never going to jump. Why do you want to be up here?" He says, "I know I'll never jump, but it feels good to be around others that jump. So some of us jump, and some of us like to be around people who jump. It makes you feel good. It's somewhat like watching. Like someone said to me, I say, you're you into sports? Of course, I watch football every Sunday. So there's, what do they say? There's that the World Series tonight, right? So they say baseball is a game where 70,000 people who need to lose weight watch 18 people who don't. So we live in a voyeuristic society, so we watch people in action, so we feel we're doing the action. We're living, we call it vicariously through the soap opera characters in our lives. And it's sad to say this, but there are people I know. You ask them, what's the drama of this week's life? And they tell you the soap opera they're watching that they can't miss. They're living through others. Hey, okay, talk about masks. So God should bless us all that we should learn to distinguish between reality and reality TV, if I may say this. That's also now a big thing, because reality TV should not be confused with non-reality TV, because it's still the same thing. It's just a name they gave it, a marketing name. We're going to experience reality now. Okay, you ready for reality? Reality, you don't need to go to any TV. Just look in the mirror and just live your life. That's as real as it's going to get. Everything else is a show. Okay, so enough social satire. I think you get the idea. Hopefully we can all, as I said, discover the inner soul. And with that I want to conclude again in honor of Avram Ber ben Yosef Ephraim Halevi. May your father's neshama awaken our souls down here. And now he definitely knows more than he knew when he was on earth. He has a bird's eye view. and everybody should only have blessings and simchas here. We continue our journey week after week, and please see the Meaningful Life Center as hopefully a place where you can be yourself and not a projected self. Philip will be giving his class. He gives a class every Thursday night, so you can contact us if you want more information. And besides that, if you haven't left your email address or any other way to contact, please stay in touch. And listen, we take a little break between one Wednesday and the next, so hope to see you next week in this continuing journey. Thank you so much. Thank you.